Okay, this video is targeting primarily Copilot users who want to upgrade to the new Copilot settings for Artisan 4.0. It's a whole new ballgame, and most of the new features focus on this new PID control window right here. So I want to walk through the new changes that 4.0 introduced on that. It's in the upper left-hand corner right here, and by default, we get a linear regression of 2 points. And but we go one step further with this, and we use this little x squared right here. That's a quadratic regression of 3 points. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, in previous versions of Artisan, when you were setting your K, your KP, your KI, and your KD, these are the gain values for your PID settings. You really had to choose one set of values to use throughout the entire roast. And what this lets you do is set 3 different values that take effect at 3 different temperatures. Well, and if you've seen my other PID video, you already know that even older versions of Artisan would let you programmatically change these values at different events. So you could have one set of KP values that took effect at the charge command. Then you could have another set of KP values that took effect at, say, dry end. And then yet another set of KP values that took effect at first crack. Well, the problem with these is that it would jump from one value to the next. It wouldn't slowly interpolate those values from one point to the next. And in Artisan 4.0, that's exactly what it does now. So for instance, and I'm using Fahrenheit, so all of these values are very specific to the Fahrenheit scale. Celsius users, you'll see something completely different here. But you'll see that I have a KP value initially of 1.8. That's a really mild KP value to what we're used to using in the Copilot. And then between 75 degrees and 350 degrees, our p-value, our kp value rather, slowly increments from 1.8 to 5. And then between 350 and just over 405, it then ramps up rather aggressively. It takes a jump from 5 to 10 in a very short window of time. But it's still interpolating those values. So what happens is we begin the roast with a set of really soft conservative values so that we try not to overshoot. We're trying to kind of train the algorithm to land on a base level heat that's going to be required for the whole roast. But then we end up with these really sensitive, highly amplified gain values for KP so that right around first crack, we can take really big swings at our heat, at our burner level if we need to, i.e. to battle the crash and the flick that we might get in Artisan software. But what I first want to say is to make note of this max burner value right here. Now, we are going to ship all Copilot settings with a max value of 80. An 80% value is maximum heat on an Artisan and Valenta roaster. So I always recommend just setting that value of 80. And I've used a few different values. I mean, quite honestly, like 78 is probably where you're hitting max heat. I put in 80 just to give a little bit of a buffer, but certainly any value above 80 will not give you any more heat, but a value higher than 80 will lead to some runaway temps at the end of your roast. So on an Artisan and Valenta, do not set your max value higher than 80. But if you're running a roast that is smaller than full capacity, it's a great idea to cap your maximum heat. So let's say you're doing a 25% batch size. I would say to set this max heat level at something like 45%. And if you're doing like a half batch size, maybe somewhere around 55 or 60%. And then, if you're between half and 3/4 capacity batch sizes, maybe 70%, somewhere around there. But it's a great idea to cap those values. Our P gain is now so amplified that if your heat is set far above what your batch size will call for, then you will get some overshoots of that background curve. And so setting a max burner value helps us prevent some of those overshoots. So what can you expect once you're actually roasting in the new version? Well, you might notice a greatly simplified UI. Now, we no longer show the rate of rise in the main graph. I have a separate video on why that is, but we've replaced rate of rise with a deviation percent. This quite simply shows the percent of deviation from the background profile. So right here, we are 0.6% below the background profile. And really anything that's below, say 1.5%, I call that good enough. That's really close to what the margin of error is on the thermocouple itself. And so I'm just going to kind of scrub here through here pretty quickly and take a look. So at the very beginning of this roast, we had some ups and downs. That is typical in this new version here. Plus, this is just the second roast of the day, so the roaster was a little bit cold. But the tracking performance from first crack onward, if you look at that deviation percent, it's just tracking really remarkably accurately. Also, take a look at the burner percent and the changes that it makes to that. We get big changes in the burner because we have these really high amplified p-values. Now let's jump over to a Sumatra, which for me is one of my more challenging beans because it's a wet hold bean that has this great release of moisture at first crack. And so it's always a really difficult one to control. So for me, it's an example of some of my most challenging, or let's say maybe my worst looking graphs. And let's just kind of scrub through a recording of this was a capacity batch of my Sumatras. So this is kind of the worst case scenario for me. Now, compared to the Brazil that we just saw, if we take a look at this deviation line, there is a little bit more deviation than we saw in the Brazil, but that is still, what do we max out at? 1.2% deviation on that. That's really not too bad at all. But let's take a look at what happens at first crack. It's starting to release all that moisture. And this is where you get the biggest crash. But let's take a look at what happens. Look at my burner. That's at 80%. So guys, remember, 80% is max. So at this point, my burner is maxed out. And we're at the 1014 mark on this roast. Let's go just a little bit further. Because on Sumatra, after that initial crash, we usually get this flick at the very end. But now take a look at this burner. In just a few seconds here, we go from max power 80% down to like 49, 48%. Look at that huge swing in the burner that we get. The reason for that is our amplified p-value. And what is the result of that? It prevents the runaway temperatures that this Sumatra was notorious for in my roasting. So what you're seeing here on the screen, even though we do get, kind of a very small, undulation in that deviation percent, the overall tracking accuracy is phenomenal. So I will end this just by scrubbing through some back-to-back roasts that I did. Take a look at the deviation percent line. That's the red, orange, green line at the bottom. Just kind of look at the tracking accuracy because these are unedited roasts. Never stopped the recording on this. And yeah, I'm super happy with the overall performance. I hope that you guys are as well. Happy roasting to you.